Follow up then?
I suppose.
Let's indulge ourselves in some follow up. So last time out, I made a plea for information, which, as always is the case, was met. So we were trying to work out, we were coming up with some ideas of why tip speed is the main consideration with spinners, rather than a calculation of energy. As always, a fantastic explanation from Garthy on the Reddit. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, I will link it in the show notes, but basically, polycarbonate is weird. It needs to flex to have its strength, and if something is too fast, hits it too fast, it can't flex, so it's going to shatter instead.
This is like that crazy stuff with slinkies and stuff. If you've got a slinky and you hold it up all stretched out and you let go of the top, the bottom will not move until the top of it has come down. So it doesn't like fall as you'd expect it to. The bottom just stays, it just hovers for a while the top all comes down. And then the slinky realises, oh, I've been let go and will fall. It's mad. Well, that's what it reminds me of anyway, not necessarily how it actually works.
I was going to say, I'm not quite seeing the link, but it's a cool physics thing. I'll take that.
Know, like, in that it takes time for the information of what's happening to travel, right? Because the other crazy thing about physics is if you imagine you've got a 4 light year long, completely rigid thing, like pole, and that pole is pointed at a button 4 light years away, is it faster to send like a light signal to someone else there to press that button for you, or is it faster to push the pole forwards such that the button gets pushed by the pole?
See, the problem is you're intentionally moving into the weirdest parts of physics.
But they're really interesting because the fastest thing in that case is...
Everything's weird near the limit. That's kind of the point.
But like, so the answer to this is it's much faster to do it by the light thing, because although you think the pole is completely rigid, the information that it's been pushed at one end will travel down the pole, I think, at the speed of sound in that material. So it'll take a lot longer.
Speed of sound?
I think so, yeah. It'll take a lot longer, or maybe not quite that slow, but like it's not instant. For one, it's not instant. It's definitely not that the end moves at the same time you push the other end, and it's not light speed either. It is slower than a photon going that distance and stuff. I have a feeling it's the speed of sound, but it might be some other thing. It might be other properties of the material that dictate this. But it's weird.
My very crude understanding, and I realise that we usually shy away from physics, this is a really weird one to get into, is that information can move at up to, but cannot reach the speed of light.
Yeah. It's just crazy. All weird.
Now, this has also brought up a misunderstanding of mine that I thought I had... Well, it brings up a misconception that I thought I had actively beaten and actually still held, which is the whole polycarbonate is bullet resistant thing. And I know that I have sat here on the podcast before and said bullet resistant means we'll only stop a bullet at certain thicknesses. So I've sort of put that out there as a thing that I think I know. It turns out I really didn't understand this fully at all. What I didn't realise, and what has been made very clear to me, is that for polycarbonate to be bullet resistant, it needs to be laminated with other materials. So polycarbonate in itself, as I presume is used in the arena, I'm guessing this isn't laminated. Unless it is, that seems like it would be sensible but expensive. So we haven't actually got a bullet resistant material there at all in the more honest sense of that term. Because I'd sort of assumed that as a bullet resistant material, it would excel at stopping things that are moving fast but are light. And I'm not making any sense right now as I talk, I realise.
Well, I think what you're saying is you would have thought that a bullet-resistant material would be good at stopping bullet-like objects, like, you know, the shards of a spinner that's just shattered.
Whereas something like an Apex bar I would consider to be by far the bigger danger because it is a big, heavy thing.
I mean, that was the bigger danger. I mean, that did break one layer of the polycarb.
It broke the layer that isn't there for protection, though.
This is true.
Those bits of polycarb on the wall are literally there to stop whole robots being thrown out for competitive reasons rather than for safety reasons. Because it turns out that the audience get really annoyed if you put a solid steel wall in their view. Although I do still wonder if a large object hitting that wall is also an issue for the structural integrity of the wall in general. So, for example, those polycarbonate panels have to be attached somehow. And I wonder what the limit is for something big and heavy hitting it that would just take the whole panel down.
I don't know.
I would imagine it's more than, the weight of a heavyweight. But I do wonder if it's something that we ever might find ourselves reaching the limit of within the rule set, just if something big enough or something with enough power did that. Because although I suppose there's a limit to how much power you can have just because of how much of your robot could be a weapon.
What do you mean? Do you mean are there rules dictating how much of your robot can be a weapon, or is this just you can't feasibly make more than this much of your robot a weapon?
Yeah, pretty much.
How much more of your robot could you make a weapon than Apex did? Do you reckon? How much more is there in that?
Depends what compromises you want to make.
If you went in with the singular goal of I want to put as much weight as I can possibly put in a spinner, like we'll just go with an overhead spinner because that's probably the example here. So if you went in with the singular vision of as much weight as is humanly possible in that weapon, I wonder how far you could go.
So that is then a question of how light can you make a viable drivetrain and a motor and battery setup for the weapon?
Yeah, and not worry at all about armor or anything like that.
Well, if you made it a shell spinner, that's also your armor. My feeling is that you could make something that could physically drive around when not spinning. But if that inside is too light, you're going to have trouble spinning the outside up.
That's just a question of getting it balanced.
Well, no, because you've also got the pure inertia of the big heavy shell versus the relatively lightweight and lack of inertia of the chassis. Although I'm thinking that if you could employ electromagnets to hold the inside still, you'd be able to spin up.
Yeah, that would be quite
This sounds like a job for Gary Kearns, let's be honest. Who else would try?
I would. Well, I'm not sure how I'd feel about that. This is funny. One of those things that's funny to think about. But if someone did it, would I then complain that it was a clearly non-competitive design?
I mean, you'd complain about basically anything if you chose to, so...
That's not true.
Talking of you complaining, we have another drum definition to tangle with.
Oh, God. Here we go.
So I'll just call up the comment. So this is from Mordecai14 on the Reddit. I define drum spinner as a spinner whose width is greater than diameter, whose cross-section is roughly circular, by which pulsar spinner counts as a drum. What do you reckon?
I mean, that's fine. That's a perfectly acceptable definition of a drum. I guess that rules out, I think like me, that rules out square cross-sections and lower in terms of like polygons. That, roughly circular allows for the asymmetric designs of some drums that we've seen. I think that's fine.
But what I don't get is why roughly circular? That seems like an unnecessary limitation to me.
Describe to me what a drum looks like.
I mean, when you put it that way...
If you go to anyone on the street and just say, what does a drum look like? They're going to describe a roughly circular item.
Or they'll describe a percussion instrument, you just don't know.
Yes, and what shape are most percussion instruments that are drums?
Often conical, actually.
Roughly circular, aren't they? Roughly circular. Basically, all the drums on a standard drum kit, they're roughly cylindrical thing.
Okay. Random thing to bring up. Do you know the song Vindaloo by Fat Les?
Is it like that thing that's associated with football?
Yes, it is.
Yes, I'm aware of this song.
In the video for that song, Roland Rivron is walking along with a square snare drum.
Fantastic. You found one example of a drum that's not circular. I applaud you.
Yeah.
doesn't in any way detract from my point, which is that most people will describe most drums as roughly circular.
But I could construct a perfectly viable drum, as in percussion drum, that is triangular. Does that mean it's not a drum?
I mean, that's a different type of drum though, isn't it? That's a percussion instrument.
Hey, you allowed it.
I mean, it's just ridiculous. Why do you insist on doing this? I think that having a two-dimensional drum is a ridiculous notion, and you can't possibly have that as an acceptable definition of a drum. It's ridiculous. It's just ludicrous.
I will allow a drum to go as low as a triangle, or triangular prism. Although...
Oh, God. I should have taken that win immediately and moved on.
How elliptical does it have to be to no longer be roughly circular?
Oh. So what, you got like the ratio of both sort of like diameters, right? You've got like the shortest diameter and the longest diameter. I know that's not quite the right word, but you know what I mean.
We get what you mean, it's good.
I don't know. I think if it's maybe 2 times longer in one direction than the other, then maybe that's too far. Maybe that's the limit.
That's very arbitrary.
Well, you've asked me a question that I haven't given any consideration to before this very moment.
Isn't that how most of this works? But no, I mean, that isn't even the main thing I have against this definition. The one thing that I really think has to be true for a drum spinner, we can argue over what cross-section we want. I still maintain that it has to be a consistent cross-section along most, if not all, of the drum. So for that reason, I still really struggle to count something like Pulsar as a drum. I see that as conjoined discs on a very thick axle.
Yeah, I'll go with that. I mean, whatever, that's fine. Consistent cross-section.
And if it happens to be triangular or something, even better.
No, that's too much. And, squares are too far as well, I think. If you've got a square, something else as well.
I mean, the nice thing with a drum is that once it's spinning, its sort of cross-section at that point is kind of round, if that makes sense.
Or it's cross-section if you smear across time, yes.
Yeah. Its four-dimensional cross-section is always going to be circular. Anyway, I can tell you didn't enjoy that. I both do and don't apologise.
I mean, what's your the final thing? So you've got to have something that is wider than its diameter. It's got to be consistent cross-section, and you'll let it go as sort of like low definition as a triangle in terms of its circularness.
I mean, I'm honestly going to say that I don't think the shape of the cross-section matters at all.
So you have so we're back to as early as last episode or whatever, like with the paddle that you can spin, and that's fine.
The only question that leaves is whether something like a beta bar counts as a form of drum. Because the way it operates is the same as a drum.
I mean, I think you've got to accept that. If you're going to go that if you've got a flat sheet of metal that you're going to spin along its long axis and call that a drum, I think if you've accepted that, I think you have to accept that the equivalent thing with a hole in the middle is also a drum. I think that's,
which, I'll be honest, does feel a little wrong.
I think you've backed yourself into that corner at this point.
To be fair, the bar also felt wrong. I just went with it because it was fun. So really, the one thing that's left to do, and we won't do it today, is trying to find the crossover point between drum and beta bar.
I'll let you think about that for a while.
I'll mull it over and deliver my definitive verdict next time.
Perfect.
Right, we're back to King of Bots.
Yes.
The round of 16, which for some reason all got squeezed into one episode, which means I'm not quite sure how they're going to fill up the rest of the episodes, but that's a problem for future us. There's been, as the series has gone on, there's been more and more time spent in the interviewee stuff and the behind the scenes, like in the pit stuff, and less time given to fights. Like if you remember back to episode 1, Really?
in episode 1 it felt like, wow, there's a lot of fights, and it's just like fight, then fight, then fight, then fight, and that was an hour of just that, which was great.
But there were a lot of cut down fights.
There were some cut down fights as well. I mean, not nearly as much as when BattleBots does the highlight things. I don't feel like there's ever been and here, let's reel off some results real quick without actually showing you any of the action. I think they've shown us like at least a minute of every fight. So yeah,
and to be honest, the ones they've cut down look like terrible fights, so I don't mind it at all.
They've cut down the right ones, and then now that they've got fewer fights per episode, there's sort of like there's more time spent outside of the fighting. It's getting closer to the like the Robot Wars balance of things, which feels like 20 to 30 minutes of robot fighting and then 30 to 40 minutes of other stuff.
I feel like that's a valid point, but I feel like this episode is a weird time to bring it up because we have had 8 fights in this 1 hour episode.
Yeah, it's still not. It's approaching that direction, but it's still more fights than other things.
The issue they've had, if anything, is that a couple of them were quite short.
Yeah.
Although actually, you know what? No, I take that back. Tansha Great White basically went the distance. Grill Judge versus Blue, good half distance. Spin Doctor Crossfire, maybe third distance. Spectre Wild Beast, that was full distance. Or was that a double knockout? It was somewhere between the two. Actually, yeah, Grill Judge Blue, well, we'll talk about that later, but went the distance. Megabyte Raging Bull, maybe half distance. Thunder and Lightning versus Saber, full distance. Rossborn Knife Legend, not full distance.
Shocker.
Snake versus Change in London, pretty much full distance. So actually, there's not even that many short fights in this.
No, I think they've done very well.
So yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. I'm just not sure it counts for this episode.
Well, it has to count for this episode because this is the most recent episode there is at the time of recording this, and I've noticed this trend.
Well, it's a thing you've noticed. We'll leave it at that. God. I think it was far more evident in the couple of episodes before. That's the way I'll put it.
If you say so.
But we should get into these fights. And oh boy, what a set of fights these are.
Yeah, they're nearly all really good fights, which is great to see. There were, not, and the fights that were not very good were ended very quickly, so it's fine. There was no two robots circling each other without touching for 2 minutes this time.
And I think we start with, can I call this the best of the episode? Actually, you know what? No, I'm going to say this is probably the fight of the series.
Ooh.
It's between this. In fact, funnily enough, this is Tantra versus Great White. For me, it's between this, Tantra versus Hammerhead Shark, and Great White versus Spin Doctor. So either way, one of these two robots gets that accolade so far.
Yeah.
You don't sound that convinced.
Well, it's not a lack of conviction. It's a lack of your memory. That's the thing. That's what I'm always contending with.
Surely you can remember the best fights of this series so far.
I mean, they all just blur into one. They're all just like one big fight.
Why are you here?
I don't know.
No one knows.
I don't know how this has happened.
Just woke up one day and there was a microphone there, didn't you?
Oh, there's a microphone here. And Ryan on the other end of the phone. Let's talk.
So Robot Wars, eh? Okay, then that means I get to definitively say this is at least top 3 and you can't argue. That works for me.
This is a horrible position for me to be in.
Here's a little almost meta question. Just to check, have you been watching full episodes or just fights?
I have been watching full episodes.
Excellent. So you've sort of watched through all of the discussion before the fights?
Yes. What
do you make of Tantra's little spike?
The spike that fell off immediately.
Yeah, that one.
Well, it fell off immediately. I don't... It's interesting, isn't it? Because of the design of their robot, the front of that is, like, for a flipper, is quite steep. So they can get that very close to the ground, but it's not the same as like a nice low wedge that can get under all robots. It's sort of an interesting shape for that kind of thing. So I think the idea of the spike was it gave like a longer, flatter platform upon which they could rest another robot before flipping it. But yeah, I mean that seems like the kind of thing that needs to be a fundamental part of the design. It can't just be welded on the front of it at the last minute, you know?
I'm just amazed that they hadn't prefabricated something like that, knowing there would probably be situations where ground clearance was absolutely critical. I mean, with the flipper, ground clearance is kind of critical anyway. But I suppose it does show that maybe they haven't tried to make the most refined design possible.
I think there's a couple of things about Tantra which sort of give away the... It's not form over function, but it's sort of like... It's more weight towards form than other robots perhaps would be. It is a very good robot, not regardless of all this stuff, but there are definitely a few decisions that feel like they've been made for the way it looks more than anything else, which is fine.
Again, especially for this specific competition where I think there really is a need to impress a brand new audience. Coming in with some more aesthetic designs is vital. So Great White, for example, yes, they've made an effort to theme it, but to be honest, it kind of looks like arse.
Yeah, it's a themed vertical spinner, and there's not much you can sort of do if you want to keep that vertical spinner being effective. Whereas, yeah, Tantra looks very good, despite the limitations, I guess, to its wedge-like nature.
I think the one thing that looks a bit cack on Great White is the self-righting arm. But I do find it quite funny that Ellis Ware is involved with anything other than a beautiful robot. Although Neon's a good-looking little thing, isn't it?
Well, I was going to ask is I know Ellis is there, and I get the impression he's taken a vow of silence. And
I mean, he's never seemed to enjoy interviews anyway, so...
This is true. But like, how much work did he do on Great White? Because Great White, I think we've alluded to this before, that it's basically that crocodile thing from Battle...
Death Roll, yeah.
Death Roll. It's sort of that with the tail removed. Which I think is possibly unfair. I don't know how much work has been done on it since then to improve it. I mean, it's a very competent robot now, so I think they have improved it. And I'm just curious how much of that is Ellis, and how much versus is Ellis mainly working on the little mini bot, and then the other guy whose name escapes me right now is working on
Steve Martin.
Yeah.
So I think I don't know if the official line is that it is or is not the main body of Death Roll. I feel like the official line may be that it's a different robot. But looking at it, it's the main body of Death Roll. And also, I had seen Death Roll not compete, but function without the tail and all the other sort of aesthetic bits as a kind of house robot in a lightweight tournament or featherweight tournament in Australia. And it is very similar. It looks like it's a new disc and a few new sort of aesthetic flares, but it is basically the same proven drivetrain and weapon system, if nothing else. Which is absolutely fine. Ellis is there having brought Neon along, which I'm guessing was largely to do with there being excess weight left over from having got rid of all the aesthetics. That, again, is a robot that he has used in the past, but I don't know if that's the official line. The impression I get from the little bits of sort of pits footage we've seen is that Ellis is helping out with the main robot when it comes to repairs. Because you feel like the repairs that you're going to be doing on something like Neon compared to the repairs you're going to be doing on something like Great White, they're at a different scale, aren't they? There's probably a lot more that needs doing to the main robot, and it makes sense that they would work together on that. I don't see why they would be, drawing a chalk line down the pit bench and saying, this is your side and this is mine.
No, that's not quite what I was suggesting. Actually, it was more, how much design input has Ellis had into Great White? Because you mentioned, like, it's funny seeing Ellis involved with a robot that's not beautiful. And it's like, well, if he didn't design any of that robot in any way, then it's it's not surprising, because it's like, he hasn't got any choice in the matter.
Oh yeah, you'd imagine that the two kind of coalesced together in some way quite late on in the process.
Yeah.
But that is purely assumption based on the fact that how much input can you really have from England on something that's being built in Australia and already is basically made?
Yeah, not a lot.
Maybe you suggest a paint scheme.
What paint scheme could you suggest other than the one they've got for a robot called Great White?
I don't know. It's a boy genius we're talking about. You tell me.
I mean, I think they should paint it bright pink.
You're going to like the new version of blue, then.
I saw a picture and I love it so much. I think it was like a rendering of someone that's done one of those like Roomba-like things that's bright pink, and that looked amazing as well.
That is from the same team.
Oh, of course it is. Wonderful.
That is Doomba.
Doomba, yes. Ah, right.
Yeah, that's also Bots FC. That was their entry for BattleBots, because I don't know if we mentioned this last time we spoke about BattleBots, but it looks like while the filming itself of BattleBots might not clash with the next series of King of Bots, it falls in the time that robots have already been shipped to China or are on their way to China. So these guys were already sending Blue/Mega Melvin over. So they tried to enter their other robot, which is Doomba, with a couple of minis, and I think got rejected.
Oh. How could you reject them? How could you reject that robot?
I don't know. It brings something different to the table as a ring spinner. Granted, we've got more of those in America than we have in the UK, but still. Solid design, proven team. Like that they've brought the big chunky wedges as well as mini-bots. Bit of character to them, bit of design flair. So much to like in those robots.
Yeah.
But maybe that means that there's some really good stuff been accepted.
We shall see.
Odds on Foxic at round what?
I sigh at you.
Did you pause for effect afterwards as well?
Jerk.
Talking of Neon, as we were many minutes ago, I did notice they went for the bar over the disc as well. I'm trying to work out what the rationale for that is.
You noticed something I didn't notice. What, in this fight against Great White?
No, against Tansha.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Obviously, I'm being an idiot. I could have sworn it was.
Although later on in the fight...
Yeah, I mean, to be fair. No, I could have sworn they had the disc.
No, they went in with the bar.
I didn't notice.
I'm guessing a bar is easier for a flipper to get harder for a flipper to get under. Because the disc is more of a sort of chunky saw blade than it is a toothed flywheel. So I'm guessing it'd be quite easy for that to ride up and get flipped. Whereas the bar is probably going to send them off sideways. Don't know if that's the rationale. Don't know if the disc was broken. Don't know if Ellis just fancied showing off his fancy new bar.
Could be any or all of the above.
Well. This is one of those fights that I think I could do a full commentary on if I wanted to, and I'm going to try not to.
So the next sort of point I've got here is about Tansha's flipper, and it gets bent pretty quickly in that fight.
It fails in a really weird way, doesn't it?
It fails in a way that's really obvious once you've seen it happen. That's what makes me laugh. Is because it's the two pipe-like things that support the flipper on the front. They bend, and it's like obviously they're going to bend. Of all the things on that are going to bend, if you keep sort of, because it's because I think the disc thing on Great White is not. I don't think it's pushing it up very much. I think it is much more a sort of a push into the flipper, and given that force, it's well, obviously that's the way that particular flipper is going to bend, which is quite funny. And yeah, it's what do you reckon they saw that coming? I guess not.
I mean, they must have not done. Otherwise, they would have done something about it, you'd imagine. But I suppose the disc, as you say, is hitting in a way that you wouldn't expect. Normally, with a vertical, you expect their wedge to get under you and for it to hit the sort of leading edge of your flipper, for example. Whereas what's actually happening, because John's being so aggressive and putting them into the wall, and the ground clearances seem to be kind of matched, no one's getting under the other. They're being hit very early in that sort of upsweep of the disc, and because they seem to have used a very hard material for that scoop, the force, I guess, has to go into the mounting of it at that point, doesn't it? There's nothing really being washed away by material getting removed. It's just getting shoved and shoved and shoved.
Yeah, that's the only way that thing could break. It did look quite funny, all like stuff. You know, like when you see those ridiculous dogs that look like they've run into a wall or something.
Yes.
It ended up looking like that.
Exactly. John's driving is so good in this fight, though.
He does such a phenomenal job of keeping the really tough bit of the robot pointed at their weapon constantly. Like,
that's just years of driving terahertz, I suppose, that kind of transfers into driving this robot so well.
Yeah. I wonder. So there was a moment where Great White did manage to flip Tanshit up, and it's hard to know, as ever, if this is just the way it's edited or if this is what happened. But it looked like Tanshit was upside down for a long time and struggling to get upright again. And it also looked like at that point, Great White was just sort of being a bit nice and didn't go in, because that seemed like the point to sort of really push the advantage, and just really go for them, and they didn't. And I don't know if the length of time there was that they did some fancy editing to sort of extend how long it felt like that took, or what really, or if Great White really were being like, we'll let them get the right way up again, and then go and keep bashing them.
I'm not sure that was fancy editing. It looked like they just literally repeated two shots from different angles in a really obvious way, because Tancha went from sort of on its nose to on its top to on its nose to on its top to righted. And as for not going in, I think that's the sensible thing to do as a driver, because you are looking at that and going, well, we've damaged its flipper to some extent. Can it self-right anymore? So the last thing you want to do is go in and right it if it wasn't going to be able to do it itself.
Yeah, no, that is a very good point, actually, yeah. That would...
You're in a position where you've potentially won the fight. The bit of driving I really love, though, from John is early in the fight. They've got Great White up against the wall. They've got the front faced at him. And Ellis has kind of tried to exploit his tunnel vision at that moment and tried to come in around the back. And John just turns perfectly at the last minute to deflect him and then gets straight back into ramming it against the wall. It's like swatting a fly. It's absolutely beautiful. And I know that you're probably going to try and tell me it was a coincidence, because you always bloody do. But I think that was great driving.
I think that was very good driving. Well done, John.
Isn't it nice when we agree? No, it's boring.
I'm sorry to disappoint you.
So after a long time of being sturdy, I suppose it all had to come to an end at some point for Tancha.
Yeah, it took a hell of a beating, but in the end, did they catch like a battery, or they caught something that kind of just turned it off, and then that was it?
Yeah, I'm not sure what it caught. It might have been the removable links, but that seems like a weird place to have them. I'm not sure if they're even using them in China. They might be using the screw system like BattleBots. It could have just been a bit of wiring loom. That's what it kind of looked like to me more than anything, but there was definitely something important and electronic there.
I think it looked to me like the batteries were on that side that they ripped the armour off, which surprised me. But maybe it wasn't back. Maybe that was something else. But it looked like that. But yeah, I think they definitely pulled an important wire out of the robot at the end there, and then Tancha was no more. Unfortunately,
I feel like if it was a battery, it would have gone up, and we would have noticed very obviously, because it got hit pretty full on.
I think there were batteries in that side thing, but I don't think that the disc on Great White hit the battery. I think it sort of caught the wires that from the battery to the rest of the robot. Is what I think happened, and just sort of like rip one out or slice something and stuff like that.
Whatever it was a very sort of hard-earned snipe.
Yeah.
Because having taken both those sides off, for that to still be running, it needed something like that to finally finish it.
Yes, a well-earned win from Great White there. I think Great White is a really solid and well-built robot, so they deserved that win. As sad as it makes me to think that we're not going to see Tancha anymore.
To me, the sad thing isn't that we're not going to see Tancha, it's that we no longer have any flippers in the competition. Oh, sorry, spoiler for a fight we're going to talk about later. I love that. I'm sat here thinking that someone might be watching the episode, watching a fight, listening to us, watching a fight, listening to us. If you're doing that, you're weird. I'm talking directly to you. You're weird.
No, how could you? No, that's so cruel. You're a wonderful human being.
I have to say, now I have said that, I'd quite like to do that, but obviously if I did it with our own podcast, it wouldn't work. Can someone else start covering King of Bots on a podcast, please? That'd be great. Something I've just realised we maybe should have drawn attention to earlier as kind of front matter is that we have gone through some predictions for the rest of the tournament, which are on our Twitter. And we did that thinking that we were going to be recording this after episode 7, but episode 7 then got delayed.
It did.
With hindsight, I'm not sure why I felt the need to point that out now, but I have.
Ah, dear. Shall we move on?
One thing I want to quickly just mention in the Great White fight, because I sort of alluded to it earlier, was that Neon did come out with a bit of damage, courtesy of Great White's disc.
Yeah. Bit of damage that was basically self-inflicted.
I'm not sure if that was necessarily friendly fire in the sort of usual sense, or if Tansha genuinely fed it onto the disc. I think it was maybe 50% column A, 50% column B.
Yeah, I think that's the likely explanation for what happened there. It definitely made me laugh to see that. Like, oh, this is always the danger, I think, of these multi-bots and stuff, especially if you're both trying to attack one robot. Is be careful not to attack your counterpart.
And teamwork is really the thing that I think we've always seen lacking in a lot of the multi-bots that we've seen in all competitions. And I think that because we're yet to see a team really get that right, I think we're going to keep underestimating multis and minis. The only time we've really seen it done well was with Nuts, and look how that went.
We've seen that. Was it like the Grubs or some equivalent thing that they've built where there was? I feel like they certainly had tactics. They had an idea of we're going to split up. You guys go over there and stuff. So then we're not all in one place and stuff. I feel like they've done quite well with the teamwork and working together as well.
Having a strategy and executing a strategy are two different things. I don't think they executed that strategy well enough. Particularly that Saber fight, because the wedge just couldn't get in under. The whole strategy was then kind of dead.
I'm not talking about them in this. The Grubs might be the wrong name for it, but they've built other clustery bot things in other tournaments, right? That team.
The Swarm and Creepy Crawlies, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a Swarm I'm thinking of in Robot Wars that did have good tactics, I think.
They did a good job of just staying spread apart. But I'm not sure. That was a defensive tactic, not an offensive tactic.
But it's still teamwork, isn't it?
Yeah, but not the kind that I'm asking for.
Oh, you're insufferable. You're insufferable.
But no, I mean, look at the way that Neon was used in this fight. Tansha is distracted trying to deal with the main robot. That leaves the rear exposed. Neon could come in and with one good shot essentially win that fight despite being so small. The tactics make a robot that should be completely ineffective effective.
No, I think that's exactly what the Swarm were going for when they've done it in Robot Wars. We're going to stay spread out, try and keep the big robot preoccupied with something else, and then one robot will sneak in from the back. It was exactly the point that the guys from Bearmoth made about that. It's hard to keep a track of where they all are and stuff. Like I think that team do these tactics. They just maybe haven't pulled it off quite as well as these guys have pulled it off now, but like they do it. And my point here is that other teams with cluster bots do have teamwork and they do a good job of it.
I suppose what I'm really getting at is more something like a Crackers and Smash, where those two robots used properly could be amazing, and we just haven't seen it at all.
If by used properly you mean used at all. Whoa.
Yeah, pretty much. So, something like the Grubs or Creepy Crawlies or the Swarm or whatever, the hardest thing for an opponent tactically going into that is the fact they've not been in that situation before. And I think that that's the main thing that they benefit from, the fact that there are 4 to deal with, and that is just inherently difficult. I don't think they necessarily get the tactics all that right with it. It's just that it's so inherently difficult that it works for them. Difficult for the opponent, that is.
Yes. Okay. I still think there's teamwork and that it counts.
I think they do a good job, but I think if they'd done better, they would have gone further.
Shockingly, if a team does better, they go further into...
I know.
I know, this is what everyone tunes in for, these real insights from Ryan here.
Well, we'll get round to Forrest's insights later as well about Crossfire, so maybe that will take the heat off. Should we get on to Grill Judge versus Blue?
Yes. Let's.
Should we have a moment's silence now or later?
Poor Blue. Poor Blue. This was an interesting fight for me because I've obviously I love what's the proper name? Mechan and Wheels. That's the proper name for these things, isn't it?
I believe so, yes.
So I have a great love of these things. And something that I noticed in this fight that I've maybe noticed but refused to acknowledge before, but definitely I was forced to acknowledge it now, is that Blue is slow to move, it's slow to turn, and it doesn't have much pushing power. And I don't know if that is a result of the motors being used, or if it's the result of cautious driving, or if it is the wheels that mean they can't push other robots around a lot. One of the big things that stood out to me in this is that Grill Judge doesn't get under Blue very often. I mean, it does do it occasionally and give these big hits and stuff, but it doesn't get under them very often. There's a lot of time where they're kind of just pushing Blue around, and it's like Blue doesn't stand a chance. It just cannot push back in any way.
I think it's always difficult to resist being pushed when your wheels are covered in free spinning rollers.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is a shame.
Yeah, it is a tricky thing, but the whole point of a robot like Blue is that you avoid a situation rather than deal with it. So you avoid a pushing match by being manoeuvred in a way that other robots can't deal with. And one of the ways that the Omni Wheels really helped them, or the Omni Drive really helped them in this fight, is that when Grill Judge got around their side, they were able to run away sideways, which they spent quite a lot of the fight doing, and that at least minimised the engagement of that weapon on their side.
Yeah, I do wonder though, because just the slow moving of it as well. The other thing I don't know if you noticed is that other robots can twitch and turn on the spot very quickly and very responsively, and it just didn't look like Blue was quite doing that in the same way. So when Grill Judge was coming from the side, it's like, well, its only move was to run away sideways. It couldn't spin itself around and then fire. I mean, I know its hammer didn't work very much, but it couldn't spin on the spot and fire its hammer at the last minute. It seems to take a lot more forward thinking, much more methodical way of driving that robot, I think, to drive that effectively.
I wonder if that's a hardware or software issue.
I really have no idea what it would be. I suspect there are...
Because obviously, when you're driving sideways, for example, your motors are in a sense working against each other, so they're having to work harder to give you the speed you get. So it makes sense that, the sideways movement, the strafing would be slower, but it does seem slow forwards and backwards as well, which should be the easy bit for the motors. So I'm wondering if it's more a case of, and I don't know how their control system works, I'd absolutely love to find out. Adam, hit us up. Interview. Sorry, I'm getting carried away with those. But to be clear, that was a real cough to start with. I just ran with it. Yeah, I'd like to know how their control system works, but there's obviously going to be some level of latency within it, surely. I don't know if that's potentially a factor.
I mean, to your point earlier about it moving slower sideways than forwards, I think that makes sense. And I wonder if the slow forwards and backwards is a conscious decision to sort of slow the motors down when they're going forwards and backwards, so that it's got consistent translation speed in all directions. Which would be a software thing. But yeah, I wonder how much of this is just the Mechan and Wheels have presumably less traction. Like you said, they've got loads of free spinning stuff on them, so they maybe just rotating on the spot might just be harder to do. It's an interesting, as we've said before, and as BBC likes to remind us, there is no perfect design. I still think Mechan and Wheels are really cool, but it's also really interesting to sort of potentially be seeing the real limitations of that style of wheel and what that means, what the trade-offs you have to make to use them are. And
it's interesting as well that this robot has always struggled against verticals in particular.
Well, I mean, its lack of speed means that it just can't... Although it's capable of moving sideways and strafing out of the way and stuff, if it can't do that quickly, it's what you'd ideally want to be able to do is almost like those bullfight things where you're sort of you've got the vertical spinner coming at you, and then at the last minute you step sideways and stuff to avoid it. Whereas because it moves so slowly, they've sort of got to be moving sideways quite early, and then the other robot's just got to turn a little bit, and they can still hit them and stuff. So.
Well, the way they utilise the omnidirectional drive is that they have an extremely thick titanium panel on the front. So they're doing that kind of terahertz beta thing of we're going to armour up one bit really well and we're going to make sure it stays pointing at you. Which is great, but it seems to have two limitations for me. Number one, when a vertical comes in and gets a bite on them, they are then out of kilter, out of sorts, and they struggle to recover to get that facing up again. Issue number two is that the ground clearance doesn't seem that low. Now, granted, Grill Judge has got a basically perfect ground clearance setup of the sort of multiple hinged wedgelets. But I do wonder if they'd be better served in situations like that, switching to something that really minimises their ground clearance, rather than just being thick armour.
I don't think Grill Judge's ground clearance is that low. Like I said earlier, they seem to struggle to get under Blue quite a lot. There are a lot of times where Grill Judge was pushing Blue around on its wedge, and it's sort of like if Blue was on top of that wedge, it should immediately be fed into the weapon and then get sent flying, which didn't happen very often. It sort of felt like their ground clearance was about equal, and it was pushing them around.
My interpretation of that was that they were struggling to get under because Blue was constantly moving away from them.
No, I don't think Blue. I think Blue was trying to, but I don't think they. I think Blue is like Grill Judge is so much faster than Blue. That shouldn't have mattered. Like they should still be. If their ground clearance was low enough, they should still get under. They should still be able to get under Blue and do damage there. I think.
I'm just wondering if Blue is sort of so easy to push sideways that makes it hard to get up on any wedge, regardless of how low it is. Because it will just freewheel away from you. It's like trying to push a piece of string.
I think if they've got their wheels arranged correctly, because the freewheeling bits on mechanism wheels are at a 45-ish degree angle, right? And if they've got those in like opposing directions, so you almost like imagine drawing chevrons, so like the two wheels on the right-hand side of the drive, if you imagine the front right wheel is going top left to bottom right with those free spinning bits, and then the rear right wheel is going the other way, so like bottom left to top right. So they're opposing.
It would have to be like that to work. So yeah, they will do.
So I don't think it's quite freewheeling. I think it's probably easier to push that than a normal rubber tire. But I don't think it's. You've still got to overcome like the static friction of the rubber bits of that wheel to actually. You've still got to make it skid across the floor. It's not. Oh, it's just going to like freewheel across it in any way. You're still skidding it around and stuff. So I don't think it's that much easier to push sideways than another robot, really, thinking about it.
But combine that with the fact that they're driving away.
Yeah, but like...
I don't know. I'm very much in sort of supposition territory here.
I just think the difference in speed of those two robots should be enough, and I think it is enough, that if Grill Judge were lower to the floor and had a better feeder wedge, it would get Blue every time.
Maybe I'm just sat here trying to give Grill Judge more credit because I really like it, but the setup they have with those wedgelets seems like the ideal setup for the fight they went into.
Yeah, I think Grill Judge is good. Like, it's a well-built, well-driven robot. It's a good robot, but I just think I don't think the front of that thing is as low as it could be.
I think this is going to have to be an agree to disagree, but the fact it's hinged alone means that it should be pretty much bang on.
Yeah, but like if you imagine, so it's scraping the floor, but if it's not sharp at the front, there's still like a flat surface.
Oh yeah, I get that.
So I think there's something like that going on.
Potentially, hopefully someone can, pop along with very handy close-up photos of that wedge. I mean, even though Grill Judge is taking hits on the side, it seems to deal with those very well. The issue they've always had going up against verticals is that stuff inside has broken, but it seems like because it's gone through a few iterations, it's broken in novel ways and they've found ways to prevent those breakages. They've now got a really reliable machine that can take these hits.
This is Blue, right? You said Grill Judge a second ago.
Oh, did I? Sorry, yeah, Blue.
Okay, yeah.
It's because it has two names. I just might as well throw a third in.
You can throw a third in, but just not Grill Judge in this case. It's a bit confusing.
Okay, Roadblock.
Oh, God, no. Right, I've changed my mind. Don't do it.
I would throw in the name of another omnidirectionally driven robot, but there aren't enough to do it.
The other big thing in this fight, I guess, was that Blue lost its hammer quite early on, and it spent a lot of time as a result kind of running away a little bit.
They were basically, for most of the fight, hoping that by ramming their face into their opponent's fist hard enough, it might break. That was what they were left with.
Even with that tactic, I don't think they did that very much. I mean, I don't feel like they were very aggressive in this fight.
I think they had to spend a lot of time trying to run away because Grill Judge was about to hit the bits they don't want to be hit on. So they were trying to get back in that situation where the wedge was facing. And they did do that, and I think when they got faced up, they were happy to be a bit more aggressive. But it is hard to be aggressive with the side of your robot, even if you can drive sideways. Now, would you like to hear some shenanigans?
Okay.
This fight apparently was a judge's decision.
Was it?
At the event, on the day it went to the judges, in the edit it went to a knockout. Now it doesn't change anything, but that is still a tiny bit dodgy. Are you being careful by not saying anything, or do you have no opinion?
I'm just thinking through. I mean, I think it's a bit. That's not great, really, is it? To have. I say that's not great. Depends what you're going for. It's it detracts from the legitimacy of this competition if they've got judges on the day, but actually we're going to present that as a knockout. But I guess it doesn't really, because it's not as if it's different points. It's not like you get some points for a knockout and fewer points for a judges in this competition, is it? It's just you either win or you lose. So I don't think it really matters in many ways.
And it has, in a sense, gone to the judges on a technicality by the looks of it, in terms of they were flipped too late to be counted out.
Yeah. So I think... So here's the thing, I guess. So if you've got, we need judges on the day to sort of decide what we should do here, but we're going to represent that decision as a knockout, I think that's fine. If it's like, it's going to go to the judges on the day, but we're going to represent a different result as a knockout and like change it a little bit, that's a big problem. Like if it were a point-based system like Robot Wars, where it's like on the day they would have been given 2, but actually in retrospect we're going to go, actually no, we're going to call that a knockout and give that thing 3. I think that's a really big problem. But I think because this is a much more binary system, it's like you win or you lose. I think if they need the judges on the day to sort of decide what should happen, but then decide for the purposes of television, present that as a knockout, that's fine. It doesn't change anything in any way. Does that make sense?
So I don't disagree with any of that, so I don't quite know what to say.
But it's interesting that there are little... I mean, I think shenanigans might even be a little bit far to do this, but it is an interesting bit of information nonetheless.
So I was just trying to see if I could find a Reddit comment about it to get a bit more info, but I can't.
Fail.
Failed you for the last time.
Well, I wish I could say it was for the last time, but alas, I cannot force choke you through Skype, so I'm sure you'll fail me again.
Well, not with that attitude.
Let me try. Anything at all?
Just a pause for effect, that's all.
Pause for effect, nothing. Right, well, there we go.
Shall we motor on?
I don't know, it depends if we can get a grip on the floor.
Spin Doctor versus Crossfire. Now, we always knew that Crossfire was revolutionary in more ways than one, but this drive system...
I mean, this drive system, it relies on the friction between the wheels and the floor. I mean, whoa, mind-blowing.
Gary, you madman. You loose cannon, you. Stop it. Stop it.
He's gone against the clear meta. Everyone else is building hovercraft, and he's gone, no, I shall use wheels.
He's just pushing boundaries all day.
It's fun to mock the Spin Doctor guys, but I also want to point out that Gary then said in his thing, I think the only thing we can do is spin up our bar. And I completely agree. That is literally the only thing your robot can do. So
yeah, it does struggle for grip while driving, let's be honest.
They're both saying stupid things.
Now, I'm going to send you a link to a robot from Robo Games last year, and other Robo Games, I'm sure.
Okay.
This is a robot called Tastes Like Burning. The link/image will be in the show notes. I really think that Crossfire would be a lot more effective with this style of wheel.
What, with the one at an angle?
Yeah, they're sort of conical wheels.
Yes.
Because the wheels obviously are at an angle to the floor, which means that only the very corner of the tyre, corner is a weird word, but you know what I mean, the edge of the cylinder is the only bit making ground contact. And I think that is seriously limiting its mobility. I think it still does quite well getting around for what it is.
I mean, I think the other big thing that limits its mobility is that the wheels are not parallel.
That is very intentional though, isn't it? Because what they want to be able to do is rotate around the front of the robot. They want the point of rotation to basically be the bar.
Yeah, but it's still like, you know, I think we covered this. We've covered this before. I still think it's ridiculous.
Crossfire isn't trying to drive forwards and backwards very much. It's trying to spin on the spot and stay faced up. It can go forwards and backwards, but not very well. Because it doesn't need to.
It doesn't have enough friction between its wheels and the floor.
It's so reliant, Sam. What were they thinking?
Such a ridiculous thing to say.
The problem is, you know exactly what he means, and that's why I feel bad mocking it. But
I feel
here we are.
I feel no badness, no shame here.
We still haven't seen that big hit from Crossfire,
No.
and that is a shame. This robot would be completely justified. I mean, it's already mostly justified for me. I know you don't agree, and that's fine. It would be completely justified if we just saw it one-shot something.
I think so. The last time we spoke about this, you sort of, I think the point that you made that I think changed my mind a little bit was around this being like a series 1 thing, and that the producers will want robots that are a spectacle, and I agree with that. So I think I'm coming around a little bit. As Crossfire, I still think as a competitive robot, I still think it's ridiculous. But as a robot that you can build because you've been given a bunch of money and you want to have a bit of fun, absolutely fine, no problem with that. And as a robot that is potentially very impressive for television, also fine with it. I think the thing that sort of sparked my dislike of this robot, I guess, was that it didn't live up to that for me. Like, I looked to that and thought, well, that's not competitive or unlikely to be competitive, but it's probably going to be very entertaining to watch. And I don't think it is. I think every time we've seen it, it's just been a bit of a letdown in terms of what it does. And I think if it had done more spectacular things with that ridiculous spinner on it, I would like it more. So yeah, I don't completely dislike it's here as a series 1 thing. Fine. If it were here in series 2, series 3, it'd be like, right, that's getting a bit old now. Please make a better robot. But yeah.
I mean, the good news is Gary seems to be building something different for the next series, with at least 4 flamethrowers.
Splendid, yes. You can never have too. Well, I was about to say it. You can never have too many flamethrowers, which I think is probably maybe true. But one of the things I noticed in this fight is that Spin Doctor has a very all-engulfing flamethrower. There are a couple of times.
It's a very unreliable flamethrower.
It is very unreliable. It doesn't ignite itself, but once it goes, it is very engulfing. Like there's a big ball of fire in the middle of the arena, and that's all you can see. And there are a couple of times where I caught myself thinking, I wish the flamethrowers weren't there so that I could see what was going on.
I mean, in this case, I'm not sure very much was going on. And we do once again have that glorious shot of them firing the flamethrower, it not igniting, but igniting off the other robot. And that sort of flashback. That was worth it. But the thing that annoys me most is that it's mounted to one side. It comes out the left side of the robot. If it was central, I'd be okay with it.
Is this the one on... Are they both off-centre? Both robots?
Well, Crossfire's one, when it goes out in its initial configuration, is hanging down the bottom middle.
It's centred on one of its edges.
But that ends up being one side or the top quite quickly.
Yeah.
Off-centre things to watch out for on Crossfire are the bloody weapon motor. And the battery that got taken off.
Yeah. This was another fight that sort of didn't end with the big explosion that I wanted it to end with. Like, Spin Doctor was very cautious at the beginning. It just sort of seemed to be running circles around Crossfire.
Wouldn't you be?
What?
Wouldn't you be cautious?
Well, yes and no. I don't know. Like, it's just I'm not saying one way. I'm just saying they were very cautious at the beginning. Okay, that's a statement of fact. They were cautious at the beginning.
Undeniably the truth.
They were just running circles around Crossfire. And then eventually they do go in, and there's, like I said, there's a big fireball, but not a lot else happens. And then Crossfire just kind of stops. And like, again, when you see Crossfire in there, you sort of, what I'm expecting, what I'm hoping, is that Crossfire will get one enormous hit on the other robot that will send them both flying, and then nothing will work again. That's sort of like what I'm expecting to happen. And instead, I think that both times we've seen it go in, it's kind of gone in, not really got a massive hit on another robot, and then just kind of stopped. And it's not what I want from a robot that looks like that.
I completely agree. My one hope is that it might be involved in a rumble where there are so many robots around it that one of them is bound to get hit.
Yeah.
That is basically the remaining hope for Crossfire.
There is still hope, but it is diminishing very quickly.
But Spin Doctor goes on. It's a worthy robot. I don't love it, but it's worthy.
Yeah. It's one of those very utilitarian robots, isn't it? It's just sort of like it. There's not, other than the flamethrower, there's not a lot showy about it, and it doesn't. I don't feel like it has a particular like design flair. It's a very standard looking box with a drum on the front of it.
I like that it's a drum spinner with good drive, but we've got Chiang Jin Lun for that as well. Which also has the advantage of being a Chinese competitor, which to me does make it, I was going to say more worthy, but I'm going to root for it more.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't want this tournament to devolve into a bunch of people that are not Chinese.
Yeah, it's great having international teams there. It helped ensure a good quality of robot, a good quality of competition. It's a set of people for the local competitors to learn from, but at the same time, you really want a Chinese competitor to make it through to at least the final. I don't think they will, but you'd like them to. Although actually, I'm going to check our predictions, which, my laptop being my laptop, will take longer than it should.
I'm going to laugh so much when we learn that your predictions predict Chinese competitor in the final.
I mean, we've both predicted the same winner, but we haven't predicted the same final, I don't think. Yeah, TweetDeck's going to take forever to load, isn't it? Of course it is. Talk among yourself.
Ryan has predicted a final between Spectre and Great White, and Sam has also predicted a final between Spectre and Great White. We predicted the same final.
Love how you went third person there.
Well,
appreciate that.
I still sometimes wonder if people know whose voice is whose.
That is a good point. And what you've done is give them no further clues with what you just said.
You're welcome.
One of us is Ryan, the other is Sam. I think we should just keep calling each other different names.
Hi, I'm Sam. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm Sam. Welcome to the podcast. With a real Sam, please stand up.
Oh, man.
I don't know if that worked.
Are you trying to get the sound of you standing up?
That's what I was aiming for. Don't know if it's what I achieved.
I mean, I heard it. Whether or not that... Yeah, right.
Shall we move on? Spectre versus Wild Beast up next.
Yes.
Now, this is interesting just on the basis of the conversation we were having in the previous episode about Spectre's tooth choices. They went with the single. Not sure if they regretted it.
It got knocked off pretty fast.
I'd like to know if the two-tooth system has the two teeth mounted separately, or if they would have both come off if one was caught by a vertical. I wonder if maybe the two teeth is better against a horizontal where one might get bent but the other will still stay perpendicular, is the word I was looking for there.
Yeah, I don't know. I would imagine that they are just a single thing that's bolted on in the same way that the single tooth was. Like they're both like two teeth on one panel that gets bolted on in the same way that the single tooth thing does that. And I imagine they both get ripped off at the same time. So
that's kind of my mental image of it as well.
Yeah, I don't think it would have made much of a difference.
And of course, it is a genuine design feature that they do break away easily.
Yeah, given how they're attached, I'd hope that that's an intentional thing. Yeah.
Well, you'd want it to be, because otherwise, one big hit is going to deform your whole crushing arm, and that's basically terminal damage for a crusher.
Yeah.
That's not something you come back from.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is. You see it in this fight that they lose their ability to do damage, but I mean, the rest of this robot has got such ridiculous power in its drive. It still works as an absolutely fantastic control bot. Like, they control this fight the whole time.
As we said last time, every crusher is a control bot.
Yes, but this is a particularly good control bot as far as crushers go.
Right, this isn't just a particularly good control bot. This is an excellent robot all around. There is a severe danger that Spectre is now my favourite fighting robot. I'm trying to think of anything that really comes close to it in terms of a complete package.
I'll tell you, if and when we see the really like the slow destructive crush that I so desperately want to see, if and when that happens, I think this might take the top spot away from Razor for me.
Big words.
Which will be a monumental moment, yeah, if that happens. If they don't get that slow, like inevitable crush, then they'll be second place. But it is a fantastic robot. I'd love to see this in the UK. I'd love to see it compete in Robot Wars.
That won't happen, but we could potentially see it at a live event.
Yeah, no, they should take it to Robot Wars and then fight the house robots. That would be really funny.
I mean, why can't we have something like this as a house robot?
Oh, a bigger version of this. Ooh.
I mean, it would be overpowered is the answer, really, but it would also basically be a derivative of Growler, but...
No, I'd love to see that. But yeah, we won't see it in Robot Wars, but I'd like to.
I mean, the good news is, well, I imagine we're going to see it in more King of Bots.
Yes.
If they ask to go back, they're going to be accepted.
I would hope so.
But man, just what a robot. What a robot.
I've been, I don't know if I've been enjoying watching the building of Spectre videos and seeing the analysis they do on like the stress of the stresses that go through that crushing arm. Especially, I really enjoy sort of seeing that, because obviously my approach to building anything is just try stuff until it works. I'm not really one for using CAD and planning and stuff like that.
God. Don't talk to me about CAD.
Yes, I've seen that you've been trying. You're probably probably learning why I don't bother. But I mean, I think for these kinds of robots, you have to do it, and it really shows the advantage that has. But it's sort of amazing to sort of see this really in-depth analysis done on where the stresses are and like subtle changes to the shape and and where the holes are and stuff in the crushing arm was really cool to see.
Minimum weight design is fascinating. I absolutely loved it. I loved it on Disco Inferno's disc back in BattleBots last time we were talking about that. The way they sort of machined out the bottom of that. Actually, I suppose that's less minimum weight design, that's more balancing. Maybe that's a bad example. But I remember I was in Budapest back in January, which for some reason I haven't managed to mention on the podcast yet, but here it is. And I was flying on a airline called Wizz Air, who were awful. And the planes were really old and dilapidated. But it meant that there were these really cool seat supports where you could see all the machining that had gone into making those as light as possible for what they were. And I really enjoyed that. And I think I even was inspired to take a photo of them just because I liked them so much. There's something about that really sort of functional design that just tickles something in me. And seeing that on Spectre, where they've also managed to meld that in with some aesthetics, it's just one of the many factors that make me absolutely love it.
Yeah, it is a beautiful robot, fantastically well built, and I'm glad we get to keep seeing it.
CAD, however, is not my friend. I should point out, I've decided with the ant weight that I could just sit down and make it, but I'd rather try and pick up some other skills along the way. It's the kind of way I just tend to think with stuff like this. So I decided that I would try to model a slightly more complex body shape in CAD. Now, I'm using free CAD. It is, as the name suggests, free and therefore not very good. But it's been frustrating nonetheless. I'm really used to the way that CAD works. So the way I made this shape was that I made a side profile, I made a rear profile, I extruded them both and took the common material between both as my shape. I'm used to doing this kind of thing through doing vector graphics on Inkscape. That's all fine. But it's just so unintuitive the way it's all put together. And it took me about 3 hours to make this 3D shape, which I then took some measurements from, put into Inkscape, printed out, tried to make a paper model of, and I'd screwed it all up anyway. The fact that doing something that simple has been so hard just increases and increases my respect for people that do come out with a full CAD of their machines. The hours of work that must go into that. Granted, I'm sure they save hours down the line, but that's mighty impressive.
Yeah, 3D design is not an easy thing to do. I think the CAD I've done is much like you, of sort of like fairly simple shapes I just extrude and then cut away from and stuff. So it's it's a difficult thing to do. I was never very good at it, and I have no real plans to become better at it because, I don't know, prototyping out a foam core is faster and more fun for me.
I'm glad I've done it. I'm glad I've given it a go. I will probably try to learn a bit more as I go along with some other things, but for now, I'm just going to put some bits of plastic together and see what happens.
Yes.
Actually, no, I am actually going to persevere. I've now fixed the model that I did in Inkscape, so I can now do it again, but we'll get to that another day. It'll just find a different way to fail now, you know. Probably to do with my complete inability to cut anything or glue anything accurately. We should probably get back to this fight, shouldn't we?
Yeah. What else happened in this fight?
I mean, the ending of the fight, I'm a little confused about. I don't know if the robots were deemed as stuck. I don't know if it was deemed as a double knockout, but it's gone to the judges either way, and luckily it wasn't a very tough decision. But I would like to know what the sort of pinning rules are in King of Bots.
Yeah, that really stood out to me. Like, Spectre had a grip on Wild Beast for a long time.
Basically the whole fight, it spent holding onto it in some way, and it did the same against Whirlwind as well.
Yeah, I would be curious to know what the rules on that are as well.
But it goes to the judges. The judges choose Spectre because, you know, it won.
if they'd chosen Wild Beast, oh man.
Oh god. And we can expect to see it again. That's their joke, not mine, so you have to like it.
Okay.
Did you not like their joke? I thought it was brilliant when I first saw it on the preview video. I actually laughed out loud. I lolled, Sam. I'd lolled. That doesn't happen very often.
Did you get as far as ruffle or not?
Not quite, but I was already laying down at the time, so... You know,
so just
had I been in a more precarious position... I'm sorry, I didn't catch whatever you just said to offend me.
just awful, then.
Well, no, it'd be rule, at best.
Why would it be rule?
Well, I wasn't on the floor laughing.
Oh, you were just lying down?
I was on a bed.
Oh, well,
yeah.
sorry.
It was night time. That's what we do. We don't all hang upside down from an attic like you do.
You don't all do that? Am I weird?
I mean, for that and many other reasons, yeah.
What a horrifying realisation to have.
Isn't that how all software developers sleep?
Is this what a quarter-life crisis is?
Oh, God. I just realised that I'd be at more like a third life crisis at this point.
Hey, old man.
Don't. Just don't. Well, our insecurities aside, I suppose we should get on to Megabyte versus Raging Bull.
Yes.
So much potential in this fight.
Yeah, it was quite exciting. So like Megabyte took it's an interesting fight because it started off one way and then changed direction. Like Megabyte at the beginning seemed like it wasn't getting spun up very fast, and Raging Bull was really taking advantage of that, and I thought they're going to have this, and Megabyte is going to lose control at some point and blow themselves up like all full body spinner things do, and then that didn't happen, and then Megabyte spun up in a controlled fashion, and and that was it.
This is maybe one of those situations where, unlike in the Tantra Great White fight, when a robot is struggling, you want to finish it off. Because I feel like there was an opportunity for Raging Bull to put Megabyte on top of the augurs and kind of finish them that it didn't take. Although that said, with Megabyte, it's so mad when it starts spinning up that maybe it would have got off. Maybe that would have been pointless, but they started the fight right. They've approached it exactly the right way. But as soon as Megabyte does get spun up, the only thing you can do is try and hit it with the right bit of your robot. And for Raging Bull, I don't think there is a right bit of the robot to hit it.
No, it's funny, like it took a massive hit, and it didn't appear to have taken a huge amount of damage. And then it just kind of slowly fell apart. You know, like that cartoon thing of like an old car that you tap once and then 10 seconds later it all just falls apart. It sort of felt like that, obviously more than the tap. It was massive whack from Megabyte and seemed to be fine for a moment, and then all kind of fell apart and then caught fire.
I thought it was two separate hits. I thought the first took one side of the wedge off and the second ended the world.
Yeah, I think you might be. Yeah, I think you're right.
Well, actually, it might have been a third hit that was really apocalyptic, where the battery went up and two wheels were off. How on earth have they done that, by the way? How have they taken wheels off of opposite corners? That's amazing.
I wonder if there was more to that fight than we were shown.
I mean, I can't prove there wasn't, but I don't see why they would have cut anything out of that. It was a good fight. I also think if they were going to cut anything, they'd cut it to make Raging Bull look good.
What, which two, was it the two back wheels that came off?
No, it was the front left and back right, I think. It was definitely opposite corners.
Yeah, I was going to hypothesise a common axle, but no, that can't happen.
No, I think it's four-wheel drive anyway, so yeah. I just suppose that could still be a common axle if they were free rotating on the axle, but that would be a weird setup. The one big weak spot, I think, for Raging Bull is that the flipper reset is quite slow, and that has limited their aggression early on in the fight.
It's quite so. The other thing that's weird about it is sort of flip with the whole front end of that robot is that you've got like these two wedge things around the flipper, but those wedges are taller than the flipper bit is, if that makes sense. It's sort of like when the robot's on that wedge, there's a gap between the robot and the flipper, which just seems odd. It's like there's those extra points where something can come in from like the inside of the robot almost and catch those wedges. If you imagine that was all flush, you'd have to come in from the outside of the robot with a weapon to knock those wedge bits off. Whereas because they're sort of raised, these sort of like triangular prism type things, there's a lot more angles there, a lot more places where you can come in and rip them off, which I think is maybe what Megabyte was able to take advantage of. When
I first saw it, I assumed the idea was that they knew they were going to get hit by horizontals, and they wanted to make sure that those hits didn't compromise the flipper arm. So they're trying to deflect hits over the flipper. So I wonder if those bits are almost seen as kind of ablative, Because they have taken a couple of the earlier hits from Megabyte without any damage to the flipper. So they're sort of maintaining their offensive potential. I don't know if that's the idea. I mean, I found it really weird that they went into the Mega Melvin fight with them on. Because I thought it got in the way of the flipper.
Yeah, and if they are meant to be ablative things, they're awfully integral to the robot. Like when they got ripped off, that robot was properly exposed at that point. So I don't think they are meant to be ablative in any way.
I suppose again that is one of those things that is very much a Generation 1 design feature, and it's something they may well look at as an improvement.
Yeah.
It's just a shame to see it go out because it's really proven in this fight that it does have the power in the flipper.
Yeah, it is a good. I was about to be bold and say that, like all the robots in this round, it's a good robot, but that's not true. But like most of the robots,
with
in
literally
this round,
one exception, though.
yeah, it's so like they're all, yeah, with that one exception aside, they are all really good robots. So,
and that's something you maybe should have said at the start. The quality of this 8 is so high.
Yeah, I've really loved in this tournament so far that every round it sort of felt like the right robots are going out, and that the quality of the robots is improving in every round, which is what you want. So it's been really good to see that. And when we finally get rid of, or now that we finally got rid of, what was it, Knife Legend, then we get nice, consistently good robots, which will be good.
I just realised I said 8 instead of 16 as well. But we've got 16 robots here, 7 of which are international competitors, and only 1 of which you would really say is objectively not that great. And even then, I think it's a really solid build that just hasn't worked out in Knife Legend. You know, a huge amount of effort has gone into that build. And they've tried to do the right things right. They tried to do the important things right. It hasn't necessarily come off, but that doesn't necessarily make it a bad robot. Just, spectacular. And we will get there, and we will look forward to it.
Before that, though, we have Saber versus Thunder and Lightning.
What a great matchup this is.
This was a really good fight, and it really highlights a point that I think you made a few episodes ago about flipper design. I think when we were discussing, I forget what brought it up, but we were discussing how the difference in how wide an arm of a flipper is, how much impact that can have on a fight. So Saber has a very narrow flipping arm, whereas other robots have a much wider one, and how that impacts things. And I think if Saber had a wider flipping arm, I think it would be a much, much better robot than it is. It's not to say Saber's a particularly bad robot, but it's like Saber should have won this fight. And I think one of the big problems they had is that the timing required to flip a small robot with a small flipper is quite tight. And I think if they had the wider surface area, they would be more likely to flip the little box they were fighting.
I think it maybe matters slightly less when you're up against another full-size heavyweight, which is kind of the situation you design for, you expect. But yeah, absolutely. I don't see any really good rationale for not making a flipper arm full width. I'm sure there is one. I'm sure someone will tell us it. But to me, it just makes sense to make as much of your robot as possible dangerous to the opponent.
Yeah. The other sort of thing about Saber that's sort of interesting with this is it's got those two flappy pod things on the front, which I think are there to sort of scrape the ground and give them lower clearance and stuff, which is great. But they're so loose and they can rotate in such a way that I think they prevent the flipper arm from reseating properly sometimes. So it takes a couple of attempts, I think, almost to get that thing back down where it should be to be useful again. So there are a couple of like those little bits like that I think that are obvious places for improvement, I think, in Saber. But yeah, otherwise a very good robot.
And one thing I sort of want to, I suppose, really point out here is that we're criticising Saber as though it has lost this fight, but Thunder and Lightning have really won this fight.
Oh my goodness me. It's astonishing, absolutely astonishing to me that, I mean, so like to be brutally honest, this is one half-weight robot that's won this fight, basically.
I'm glad you said it so I didn't have to.
Which is astonishing. Like that robot, although both of those robots are assuming they're built much the same way, is astonishing. That's just amazing to me that it's come this far in the competition and is still winning things. It's just amazing.
The power they're packing into that weapon is incredible. You know, okay, Saber isn't the most heavily armoured robot in the field, but they've come along and just systematically taken little chunk after little chunk after little chunk. They've scored huge with the judges there, I'm sure, because they're constantly aggressive, they're constantly doing little bits of damage. And even found time to go and try and help the red one out, which, by the way, would have self-righted just fine if they just turned the disc off. The disc was keeping that on its side. And that really annoyed me at the time.
They're astonishingly stable on the sides, aren't they?
They're just astonishing machines. I love them.
Yeah, they've really... It's really grown on me, those two little robots. They're good. I'd love to see... So the red one is the one, presumably, I hope anyway, driven by the kid. And he does fine. But I'd love to see what could be done if you had two like really competent drivers. Like if you imagine two Michael Oates level drivers with these things.
Oh, yes.
What could they do? That would be really, really cool to see. And I mean the other guy, the older guy, the dad is seems to be a really good driver as well. Like he's doing they're really well driven robots as well.
Again, this is what we should be seeing from robots like Crackers and Smash. They undoubtedly have the power in the drive, and they have good drivers. This is the sort of performance I would love to see from a multibot in Robot Wars.
Yeah.
I do also think, I think the kid is doing a good job with what must be a quite difficult to control robot. Because the way that gyros, when they want it to, that can't be easy to control. I kind of wonder if the better approach, although not necessarily fitting with the ethos of the robot, would be to give him something with a less powerful weapon that's easier to control. So give him a lifter or a plain old wedge or whatever. But I suppose he's only going to learn to drive it by continuing to drive it. So
yeah, I mean it is what it is. I mean it's like I said, it'd be interesting to see what they could do with two competent drivers. But
I would prefer to say experienced drivers in this case. That just feels kinder.
Yeah, you're completely right.
Although what you're saying is also completely true.
But it is also really lovely, I think, to sort of just see like this father and son team coming on and doing it, and as well, like and the guy not being like a token person on the team or whatever. Like it is sort of like, no, you've got a proper robot and you're in this thing properly fighting and stuff. So I think that is really good to see as well.
Yeah. I suppose I'm saying that they could change up. I think the equity is probably the most important part of it, isn't it? And from what we see, it seems like the kid is also involved in the repairs quite well. I would very much hope they didn't pose up those shots just for TV. It seems like, he knows what he's doing, he's learning what he needs to be doing, at least with it. Which, given my arguments I've made about certain things, is something I have to support in the interests of unusual consistency.
Who are you?
I don't even know anymore, man. So yeah, there's really nothing more to say about that. The one thing that remains to be seen is whether they can take a hit. We haven't seen them up against any kind of powerful or damaging weapon. And we're not going to see it in the next fight either, because they're up against Snake. Which I must say, you know what? I've predicted this as a win for Snake, but I'm starting to doubt that now.
Yeah, I've got it predicted as Thunder and Lightning.
Snake is a very good robot, but...
Yeah, that was one of the hardest ones for me to decide between those two, because they are all good robots. And I was a really tough one to figure out. And it could go either way, really. It'd be a good fight. I'm looking forward to that one.
Very much so. I mean, I love Snake as well. I want them both to win.
Should we start making our way towards discussing Snake and quickly touch on Knife Legend versus Rust Boar?
I'm not sure this will be quick. That's the thing.
How can it not be quick? I will summarise the fight for you, and then we can move on. You ready for this? Knife Legend drives into a wall again and destroys itself. And that's the fight. Now, I understand that driving robots is hard. And I understand that the torque from spinning up that weapon is going to force the robot to turn. And I understand that the design of that robot with its wheels so damn close together makes it hard to counter that. But they've done this every time. There comes a point when you want to reach through the screen and slap the driver and say, when it spins up, it's going to spin toward the wall. Like, expect that and do something about it. So, like, I'm glad this robot is gone.
I don't want to pan the driver too hard, but I will say this. If you're going to take inspiration from a robot's design and design your robot similarly, you should also be taking inspiration from the way that robot is driven. Watch how Ray Billings lines up in his box before a fight. So, 12 o'clock would be facing your opponent. He's looking at like 1:30. He's rotated 45 degrees clockwise because he knows that when he starts that bar up, his robot is going to be turned anti-clockwise. He knows it's going to happen, he accounts for it in the way he sets up. Knife Legend, if anything, has lined up, rotated anti-clockwise. So they have... okay, it's a hard thing to control, but you're absolutely right. There is a way to avoid or at least minimise it, and they have done the opposite. And it must be... I mean, I imagine he's gutted that he's made a mistake like that, but to put so much time and effort into building and not do that little leap of thinking is a real waste.
It's... The biggest thing is that this robot has been driven into a wall every time it's fought. That's the thing that really bothers me. Is every time it goes into a wall and breaks itself, and it's just, I'm willing to let things pass the first time. Like, you're learning, it's new, that's fine. But there comes a point when you've got to start thinking. Surely you see what's going on here. Surely you see the pattern.
I imagine he sees the pattern now better than he did before this fight.
Yeah.
But, as I was saying earlier, it's, in a sense, quite an ambitious build in that he's done it almost entirely out of titanium, that frame. And titanium welding is difficult. So the fact he's got this thing together and that it has taken all the hits it's dished out on itself up until this point is quite impressive. And the fact it has self-destructed, I suppose, was kind of inevitable, but fair play to him for making it last as long as it did.
I mean, I think it got re-welded a few times in the competition. Like, I think the framework, I mean, this was like... I think it got re-welded and was weaker basically every time, and this was just the final thing it could do.
I wonder if they had sort of the appropriate gear for titanium welding there as well. It's not necessarily something you're going to be set up for.
I don't know. I mean, it looks like from what little behind-the-scenesy type stuff we get, it looks like they were doing, like, he was re-welding his robot rather than in Robot Wars where it's someone else doing it. So I don't know if they're able to bring their own equipment to repair their robot or not.
I suppose that's so far behind the curtain we'll probably never know, but...
Yeah, we never will.
He's worked hard. It's a shame he's gone out the way he has. At least it made good TV.
I don't think it made good TV. It was just frustrating. It would probably have been better TV.
It's a good 10 seconds of TV.
Yeah, it may have been better if it was cut. I don't know which version of this you watch, but like the one on YouTube, it's interesting. Like Chinese television seems to have all the adverts at the end of the thing, or all
yes.
not adverts, but like it's fun. There's a long chunk of time when nothing happens, and you got these weird breaks of what sounds. It's also quite funny that the ad voice is the same. You can just hear this is an advert or something. You know what I mean? Like there's a particular voice that's used for advertising, and I think it's the same in all languages. So there's that thing. So it was sort of weird that it was sort of like the reaction to the destruction, and then a random little break thing that I don't know the purpose of because I don't speak Chinese, and then.
Well, advertising is the purpose.
I assume it's advertising, but yeah, it sounds.
The version I watch tends to be the actual live version, so it has the adverts in it. Which is often the same advert twice or more in an ad break, funnily enough. You know the really interesting thing about this fight, though? Rustbore has taken serious damage and has to withdraw. The drum shaft at some point has sheared, which means that they also don't go through from this fight.
Oh dear, what a shame.
Which means the loser of the next fight goes through instead.
Ah, cool.
I guess it didn't have to be this fight, but there's a very obvious reason why it was.
Yeah.
So, Snake versus Chiang Jin-lun, the robot whose name I refuse to spell correctly, it seems. I don't think I've spelt it the same way twice yet.
Oh dear. Do you want to continue the meme about Snake's weapon?
There's a meme about Snake's weapon?
Maybe meme was a bit strong. There was a lot of discussion on the BattleBots and possibly the Robot Wars subreddit about the design of the weapon on Snake, because it's got one motor that does the whole thing. I
feel vindicated because the way I assumed it worked turned out to be the way that it actually works.
Nice.
What I couldn't do is explain it. I mean, actually, I could have a go. Or could I? I can visualise it, but that's about it. So basically, every single part of it is connected in such a way that the first bit to move is the top jaw, and once that is jammed against something, everything else moves instead. That's the best I can do. Yeah, it is a really elegant solution, actually. I really like this way of doing the weapon. It's not without its flaws, though. I mean, it's interesting that obviously that's a fantastic way of doing like a control thing, and the suplex move that it keeps doing is always entertaining. It makes for good television. But I do think to sort of like, I feel like all it can do is a suplex, and you almost wonder, I think it'd be very hard to like hold a robot consistently and then like dump it somewhere. I think it's possible, but I think it's quite hard. Yeah, I think the suplex move, it does a lot because that's its only move. I wonder if it can maintain a grip on something, or whether as soon as the motor stops being run, the grip is lost.
No, it'll maintain it because it's a mechanical thing. So if you imagine the motor lifted up to 45 and then stopped there and could hold it at that angle, I think it would still have a grip on the robot.
Well, the weight of the robot trying to pull the whole jaw down would keep the top jaw pinched.
Yeah, exactly.
For want of a better word. But if it held something up at 90 degrees...
Yeah, exactly. It's got to be held at an angle that's less than 90, and then you've got to have a way of I don't know how the motor, what motor they're using or how much control they have over it, if they know its position or that kind of stuff. But it's mechanically probably quite hard to then find a way of just holding it there. So I think it's a very simple weapon, and it's beautiful as a result. And like I said, the suplex thing is a very pleasing thing to watch, but I think as an offensive move to other robots, it's maybe not the most damaging thing in the world.
I mean, it's good for reliably inverting an opponent, which in a fight like this really works in their favour because they're up against a drum that, when inverted, is practically useless. Although, to be honest, you know what? Actually, it was more useless right way up because Snake's ground clearance is so damn low that nothing seems to be able to get under it. And if the feeder wedge can't get under you, the drum's not hurting you.
I think it was worse the other way up because unlike a lot of other drums, the feeder wedge sort of blocks access to the drum when it's the other way up. So I think when it's upside down, I think it's very hard to even get the drum to make contact with something because it'll hit the feeder wedge and get stopped.
But it could have sort of run over Snake and taken a few chips out that way. Whereas the other way up, the drum's never touching it full stop because it's not going up the wedge. And again, the whole thing with Snake is that the low ground clearance completely dominates the fight. Because as soon as the opponent knows they can't get under them, the onus is on them to get around the side or back, which means that Snake can sit there, stay faced up, and just wait for an attack to come in. Their patience on driving and their timing with the weapon is superb. And that's the thing that makes their fight against Thunder and Lightning so hard to call. Because Thunder and Lightning is one robot that, if driven well enough, can definitely get around the back. Driven well enough, there's nothing they can do to stop it. It's whether it'll be driven well enough.
Yeah. That'll be a good fight. It'll be a good fight.
And of course, the really silly thing is that they have technically lost this fight.
This was a weird end, wasn't it? It was sort of, they got, Snake kind of stopped first, and then Cheung Jin Lun came in and got itself stuck on top.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the smart-ass response of, wouldn't it be great if there was a third producer-controlled robot that could come in and free them? But it was sort of, the ending of this is I think that, so we went to a judge's decision and the judges gave it to Cheung Jin Lun, which I think is the correct call because Snake stopped first. But it's still a very disappointing end to that fight.
It's also the wrong winner on the balance of the fight, which I hope that was a very genuine consideration when they needed to replace Rustbore. They went, well, Snake is the obvious one because it lost its fight by the smallest margin.
Yeah, what's disappointing is that you sort of think if they'd stopped at the same time, then you've got a situation where, well, Snake was in control of that fight. Snake was the thing that should win. But I think by the letter of the rules that I have in my head, which aren't necessarily the same as the rules that the judges are using, I think they did make the correct choice. I think the fact that Snake stopped first mean it would get counted out first. If you imagine when the timer starts, it would hit the you're out first and therefore have lost. So yeah, it was a disappointing ending to this fight and to the episode in many ways. But I'm really glad that we get to see Snake again as well.
Really, what we've had there isn't a judge's decision, it's a judge's ruling. In that they have had to make a ruling on how the rules should be applied rather than actually judge a fight.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Which I'm guessing, if you're watching this as someone who speaks the language, was very clear. But for us, I was a little confused over whether it had been classed as a pin or a double knockout or what.
Yeah, it was also funny because there was a lot of shots of conversations between lots of different people very quickly at the end of that. So sort of, yeah, I think
including one referee who I thought looked really pensive, as though he was about to get in trouble.
Maybe he had some money riding on that fight.
Oh God. Now that's the kind of shenanigans we definitely can't call.
Yeah, to be clear, I'm not actually making that accusation. That was a joke that I didn't think through.
The best kind of joke. But as you say, it's a slightly underwhelming end to the episode, as seems to be the kind of pattern with these.
Yeah.
But still, what a set of robots, what a great set of fights. I mean, when was the last time we came out of an episode of Robot Wars having had this kind of quality?
Ever? Has it ever happened?
The grand final this series, I suppose.
Yeah.
Heat A of Series 9, I'm always going to have a soft spot for as well. By sheer virtue of exposure.
Yeah, good stuff. So we've sort of referenced our predictions a few times. I know we've tweeted images for it and stuff, but should we go over them quickly now?
Yeah, we can try to. We can explain our choices a little, I feel.
Probably. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure we could.
Do you want to go through yours first? Because you probably already have them open.
Yeah. So the next set of fights, we're expecting to see We're expecting to see Spectre versus Grill Judge. And I think that's a really hard one to call. I think Spectre will win, but I think it will only just win. I think Grill Judge has a really good chance of winning as well, because it's I think Grill Judge is a really solidly built and well made and well driven robot. So that's a really close one, but I think Spectre will just get it. The other fight, the next fight, I guess, will be Thunder and Lightning versus Snake. And as I said earlier, I think it'll be really close. I think Thunder and Lightning will just get it. Great White versus Cheung Jin Lun. I think Great White will get that. I think Great White's spinner is more effective. And Spin Doctor versus Megabyte. I think Spin Doctor will get it. I think they should get it because Megabyte is so unpredictable. But we shall see. Shall I carry on down the?
Go right through your bracket.
All the way through. So in the semi-finals, I guess you've got Spectre versus Thunder and Lightning. And I think Spectre will win that. I think Thunder and Lightning don't stand a chance in that case. And then Great White versus Spin Doctor, which I think it's another sort of close one. I think Great White will get that one because I do really rate its vertical spinner. Actually, I think it is a really good robot. I think it will, and they've beaten Spin Doctor before, so I think they'll do it again. What have you got after that? You got like the third place playoff, which will be Thunder and Lightning versus Spin Doctor. I have no idea who will win that. Spin Doctor probably, but Thunder and Lightning might pull something out. And then the final would be Spectre versus Great White. And who knows who will win that?
Well, you've put Spectre, so
I think Spectre
presumably
will win
you.
Yeah, I think Spectre will win that.
I mean, we have a lot of common ground between our predictions. I really can't fault anything you've said there, because the whole thing is just that close. So in terms of similarities, I've got Spectre beating Grill Judge. Grill Judge is a great robot. It is really solid. I think they're super unfortunate to come up against Spectre at this stage. There are lots of reasons to think that Grill Judge would win, but it's Spectre.
Yeah, I think if Grill Judge were in any other branch of this bracket, I think it would get to the final pretty much. I genuinely think it's a really good robot. But yeah, I just think Spectre is just a little bit better. And I think there's also an element of bias here in that I want Spectre to get through. I want to see more of it fighting. If Grill Judge wins that fight, I'll not be sad. Like I'll
be a little sad.
Well, there'll be a part of me that's sad, but it won't be like an unreasonable thing to have happened. You know, it's not going to be an upset, really. It's going to be, Grill Judge is a really good robot, and under any other circumstances, I would have it in the final, I think.
I mean, my major prediction for that fight is that it's going to go near the distance. Spectre are going to win, but they're going to pay a price for it as well.
Yeah.
There's no way they come through that unscathed. So that's that one. Thunder and Lightning versus Snake. I've put Snake, but I'm really starting to talk myself out of it. I'm going to stick with it, because if I don't, we've basically got identical predictions, and that's no good. But it's a very close one. The one way I see Snake winning that is they've got to focus on the blue part of Thunder and Lightning. And I think Snake is well built enough that, yes, it's going to take some hits, but I don't think they're really going to mess it up too much.
Yeah, that will be such an interesting fight. I think that's going to be the most interesting fight here, really, in many ways.
It isn't going to be one that's great for a highlight. It isn't going to be spectacular, but it's going to be fascinating. All the others are going to be full of big hits, but that's probably going to be the most interesting. So that's my call for that. It's more of a qualitative prediction than a quantitative prediction, if that makes sense. Great White versus Cheung Jin Lun. It feels clear-cut, but I don't think it is. It's really easy to say Great White will beat it because it's basically another version of Spin Doctor. The one thing that's going to be an issue here that wasn't in that fight is ground clearance. But even so, I think you've got a vertical disc against a drum. The discs usually win out in that situation. We could see in the build-up to Spin Doctor's last fight the damage they'd taken on the drum from that fight with Great White. Discs do damage to drums, not the other way around. And I think the fact that they've got Neon there as a little nuisance is going to be quite big, especially because Jinlun, it has got big exposed wheels. I think there's a chance that Neon is really going to come into its own in this fight and make a big difference.
The other thing about Neon in that case as well is I think it'd be quite hard for Jinlun to put, because they've had armor on the sides before, but I think it'd be quite hard for them to get armor that's sufficiently low to stop the undercutter thing that Neon has.
Undercutters are hard to deal with. That's really the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it isn't something that they're going to necessarily have come prepared for. I also wonder how much they're going to be able to prepare the damage to their wedge from the snake fight.
Yeah, that's true. That got pretty bent out of shape, didn't it?
To the point where they were probably unhappy to have been righted at one point. Spin Doctor Megabyte is tricky. I think what I've really done is predicted what I want to happen, not necessarily what I think will happen. I think these two are going to be trading kinetic energy, which is always a fun fight. Spin Doctor's lack of a feeder wedge makes me think that it's not going to be able to overturn Megabyte, which is what you'd really want from a vertical against a horizontal in this situation. You want to be able to flip them up. Obviously, once Megabyte is upside down, it's all kinds of messed up for a while. I don't see that happening. I think Megabyte's going to get big enough hits on those front corners that it's going to, if nothing else, take the weapon of Spin Doctor out.
Yeah, I think, thinking about it a bit more, I think if Megabyte is working at its maximum, if Megabyte works properly, I think it probably should win. I think it's got more attack in it, but I think it's so unpredictable. It feels like it's as likely to destroy itself as anything else. So yeah, it's hard. It's a hard one to call.
Fittingly, it's a wild card.
Yeah.
I am glad these two are matched up together because I would hate to see this as a final. No disrespect to either team, I just think it would be a really poor final. I'm glad we're getting it out the way a bit earlier because what we have got, certainly in my prediction of a Final Four, and in yours I suppose, is a fantastic variety. Unfortunately, the spinners and the sort of more control ones are going to face off there, but again, that guarantees variety in a final. So on that note, Spectre versus Snake. I want to say that's easily Spectres. I don't think it is quite that clear-cut because they're reliant on ground clearance, but I just can't look past them.
If we get Spectre versus Snake, I will be, because they've both got great wedges on the front. They're both really good at getting under other robots. It'll be really fascinating to see who wins that as well.
I think because Snake has essentially got forks, it should be easier to get those right on the ground. But again, Spectre's been built to such a level of precision that you just have to assume it's basically perfect. That's basically what I'm working on, the assumption that Spectre is perfect. Great White Megabyte, really tough call. Really tough call. I think Great White has enough about it that it can get the one big hit it needs to put Megabyte over. And I think once you get Megabyte over, you're in a very strong position, and that is a time where they will be aggressive. I do, however, fear for Neon in that situation.
Yes, that might be the last we see of Neon.
Then it comes to Snake Megabyte. I've gone for Snake. Again, I think that's more what I want to happen than what I feel will, but they are a robot that can get control of Megabyte. And I think they're good enough drivers that they will be aggressive enough at the start to turn the tables in their favour. That's a very tenuous prediction, though. That's really one that could go either way. For a final, Spectre versus Great White, it's hard to know which bits of Great White Spectre could really get a bite of, but I trust them to find the bits they can.
Yeah, that final of those two robots will be so dependent, I guess, on driving. Because I think if Spectre can get around the side or the back of Great White, that's it. It's game over. But be interesting to see how long Great White can keep its big scary front faced at Spectre.
Neon would also have an interesting part to play in that because we have seen that Spectre is good enough at taking its own tyres off. So you imagine, especially if they're sort of distracted by having hold of the main bot, that's a really good chance for Neon to get in behind and maybe do some damage. So if Great White's going to swing it in their favour, I think it will be that way. But to be honest, any combination of these results, I think we're going to get a set of great fights.
Yeah, it's been a really good tournament so far, and it's shaping up to continue to be a really good tournament, which is cool.
Outro me, Sam.
You can find the show notes for this episode. Oh, before I do that, what should I say people should tweet us?
That's your job, not mine.
I know, but the last few times I've done this, I've not thought ahead and panicked, and it's been lame. So.
This is staying in the edit, by the way.
Have I done board games before?
I don't know, but go for it.
I think I have, because there was a fantastic quote of you telling me what a board game was.
I think you should do it again so that I can talk about the one that I just made.
You made... Oh, blimey. Okay.
You know about this already. You were in the conversation while I was getting design
I was
help.
in that conversation. I remember now, yes. That was really good. You can find the show notes for this episode at spinnerproof.com/episodes/25. And there you can find links to all the things we've been talking about today. You can also find a link to our Twitter at Spinnerproof, where you can tweet to us your favourite board game.
And you can also tweet at Sam to release episode 0 in celebration of hitting a square number.
There is no episode 0.
There is episode 0. It exists. Don't listen to him. After show.
SpaceX this week launched another rocket. The interesting thing about this was their first sort of like public attempt at recovering the fairing from the rocket. So if you're unfamiliar with the names of the various parts of a rocket, the very top of it, there's like a protective shroud around the payload, and once you're out of the atmosphere, you don't need it anymore. It's dead weight, so it gets ejected, and then just re-enters the atmosphere, and normally just like burns up or breaks up in the atmosphere, and it won't burn up. It will break up in the atmosphere and then land in the sea or on land, depending on where you launched it from. And fairings they're kind of expensive to make. I think the thing about SpaceX ones in particular is they're quite time consuming to make. It's like a very composite woven material type thing with a resin, I think. So it's, yeah, they SpaceX want to recover more and more of their robots. So they've been trying to think of a way.
They're robots?
They're robot? Oh, blimey, they're rocket. So they want to recover the fairings as well. And sort of like they've been low-key finding ways to do this for a long time. They've never really publicly talked about it too much, but if you follow closely what the company's up to and stuff, that this is what they've been trying to do. And on their most recent launch, they tried. And Ryan, you have no idea how they've done this. Am I correct in that thinking?
So I'm struggling with this whole concept. First of all, I'm still struggling with the why. It seems like in the costs of spaceflight, the fairings are probably quite low down the pecking order, but you're saying they're difficult to make, and I trust you on that.
There was definitely a time where SpaceX was bottlenecked on the production speed of their fairings. Like, they couldn't launch because they didn't have enough fairings, and that was the thing that was stopping them from launching.
That sounds like an operational failing, not a technological issue, but there you go.
The thing about making fairings is that you've got to have this massive thing in one oven, right? Because you've got to like bake it to cure all the stuff that goes into making it, like all the resins and stuff. So you've got to bake it for a while in a massive oven, and they don't have many of these ovens. So,
or they could just make them out of tin and spit, like in the old days. We got to the moon on tin and spit fairings, I'll have you know. We don't need this newfangled resin.
I wonder what the Americans think of you saying "we" there.
I'm talking as humanity, as we should. Genuinely, though, space isn't about national pride. I'm just going to put that out there.
No, it shouldn't be, and I agree with you. But I also would wonder, in an alternate universe, if the UK were the people that were first to the moon, would we still think that?
Of course not. We're not a very rational people.
Shall I tell you about how they've been recovering fairings?
You see, I want to try and think through how this would be done.
Go on, have a prediction.
Because obviously fairings don't have any control surfaces and they don't have any thrust. So either they've added control surfaces and or some means of providing thrust, which seems stupid, or they're just trying to work out how to aim them.
SpaceX have added thrusters and control surfaces to their fairings.
No.
And by control surfaces, they've got a big like parafoil parachute. And then even though it gets better, yeah, they've got another boat. And the boat has a giant net attached to it. Like Elon has described it as like a glove mitt thing, like in baseball for catching the thing. So this boat with a massive net on the back of it to catch the fairing as it like parachutes down.
Something gives me the feeling that all they do at SpaceX is just watch cartoons and go, "Can we do that?"
Oh,
I mean,
it's so good.
It occurred to me as you explained it that the obvious answer was just a parachute. I mean,
So
did they reject the parachute, or did they just not think of the parachute?
They will have. I think so. Like I said, they've. This is the first time they've like publicly talked about recovering fairings. But it's been known that they've been doing this, and I think some of the things they've tried are parachutes. But you've got the problem with parachutes of having a parachute that's big enough to give you a properly soft landing on its own is very heavy, and then you've got the difficulty of aiming it, and
also the speed you've got to decelerate from. Although I imagine that there's a point where it's just falling at terminal velocity because it's come through atmosphere.
There's a bunch of problems with doing it, and I think what they're trying to avoid with all their stuff, if they can at all help it, is to not have stuff splashed down. They don't want stuff going in the sea because it's corrosive and not fun. So they're trying to avoid that, and they've tried to avoid it with everything that they do. The only thing that I think they've given up on that idea of is with Dragon 2. The original plans for that were a thruster landing onto land, or similar to, but not exactly the same as how Russia does it with the Soyuz thing. So the Soyuz has like a parachute and then retro thrusters at the last minute, and the Dragon 2 was going to be entirely a powered descent. But I think considerations like pressure from NASA around the safety of doing that, they've gone for it. They're going for a splashdown.
I was going to say, fully powered descents and human rating don't seem like things that should go together. Not
right now. I think long term for space travel and access to space to be as cheap and convenient as SpaceX want it to be, I think you need, at some point they're going to need to do fully powered descents, I think. And you definitely need to do it for Mars because there are no oceans in which to splash down. Not yet, anyway.
And not a great deal of atmosphere to slow you.
And yeah, exactly. So also not yet. So we'll see about that. But so that's what they're trying to avoid that with all the things, which is why they've got the ridiculous boat. And once you've gone with we need a boat to catch that stuff, I can't really say that with a straight face. It's so silly. Once you've got a boat out there with a massive net to catch the fairings, you need to be able to steer the fairings and stuff. So they've got thrusters and stuff so they can target where it enters the atmosphere, and then they've got the big the parafoil thing so that it's got a bit more control over where it goes. It's like flying with direction rather than just sort of falling.
It's a hang gliding sheet of metal at this point. Sorry, composite.
Yeah. So just to complete the story here quickly, they didn't manage it. The fairing missed the boat by a few hundred meters apparently. Which is a shame, but there is a great picture of the fairing just basically looking like a small boat, just floating on the top of the sea, which is quite funny.
How funny would it be if it just turned out to be fully recoverable from the sea after they'd gone through the whole effort of a net boat? Also, hang on. This net boat, is this a small boat with a massive frame with a net on it, or is this a net stretched between boats?
This is one so. I'll send you a picture of it. I'll see if I can find it.
I sincerely hope it's option 2 because that just seems like the correct thing to do, but I feel like it's option 1.
It's one boat that has a genuinely like if you make like a small boat and then just this huge net like above it, suspended on these huge long arms that spread out either way for this net. It is so insane looking.
Sounds like a piece of circus equipment.
What's it called? This thing is called Mr. Steven.
Because of course it is. I suppose it's not Nettie McNetface, given the marketability that name would give them.
Genuinely, he'll do it. He'll call something stupid. She'll call one of his ships or rockets something like that one day, I'm sure. Ooh. Have you seen the picture?
I've just found one myself, and this does not look as big as I expected. This looks like a moderate-sized radar dish.
What?
Yeah, it is the same photo as well. That doesn't... I was expecting something much larger.
Yeah, but like compared to the size of the boat, it's insane.
No, it's not. I was expecting something far more ridiculous.
Okay, I'm sorry I've oversold that.
This looks no weirder than a helipad on a little boat does.
Okay. Well, I apologise for giving you an inaccurate description of what this thing would look like.
If anything, I'm now left disappointed and betrayed.